The wagon jolted over another rut in the frozen road, and Clara Nightshade bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood. She pressed her palms against the rough wooden slats beneath her, trying to brace herself against the constant jarring motion that sent waves of pain radiating through her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant, and they'd thrown her into a supply wagon like a sack of grain, wedged between crates of dried meat and barrels of ale meant as tribute offerings. Tribute. The word echoed through her mind like a death knell. That's what she was now. Not a pack member, not a she-wolf with a name and a history and dreams she'd once foolishly harbored. Just tribute. Payment to end a border war that had claimed 17 lives over 3 bitter months. The Silver Pine pack had weighed those 17 souls against one pregnant, mateless female and found the math acceptable. Clara closed her eyes and focused on breathing through another cramp. The pains had started 2 days ago, subtle at first, just a tightening across her lower back that she'd attributed to the wagon's endless bouncing. But they'd grown sharper, more insistent, radiating around to grip her belly in a vice that made stars burst behind her eyelids. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the way her wolf whimpered at the edge of her consciousness, too weak to do more than pace anxious circles in the shadows of her mind. Please, she thought, one hand pressed protectively over the swell of her child. Please hold on. You're all I have left. The canvas covering the wagon's bed flapped in the bitter wind, letting in knives of cold air that cut through her thin traveling cloak. They hadn't given her a proper winter coat. Why would they? She was already dead to them. Alpha Varin had made that abundantly clear when he'd announced her fate 3 days ago, standing before the assembled pack with his mate Lissa smirking at his side. The tribute terms have been negotiated, he'd declared, his voice carrying the ring of authority that once made Clara's wolf bow in submission. Shadowmere Pack has agreed to cease all hostilities at the northern border in exchange for resources and... His pale eyes had found her in the crowd, cold and dismissive. One female of breeding age. The shocked murmurs had rippled through the gathering like stones dropped in still water. Clara had stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs as her mind struggled to process his words. She looked around desperately for Cale, for the male who had courted her for 2 years, who had whispered promises of forever against her lips, who had planted the life now growing inside her. But Cale wasn't there. Cale hadn't been there for weeks, not since the night he'd discovered what the healer's tests revealed. No noble bloodline. Clara Nightshade, the female he'd paraded before his high-ranking friends as his intended mate, was nothing but common stock. A nobody. Her mother had been a rogue taken in by the pack out of charity, her father unknown. Probably some wandering wolf who'd moved on before Clara was even born. For years, Clara had hidden this shame, had let Cale assume her reticence about her parentage was merely orphan's grief. But the mandatory bloodline testing required before a formal mating, there was no hiding from that. You lied to me, Cale had snarled, his handsome face twisted with disgust. You let me believe you were worthy of standing at my side. My family has held beta rank for 6 generations. Do you have any idea what it would do to my standing if I made it a mongrel? Clara had tried to explain, tried to tell him that she hadn't lied. She'd simply never known the full truth herself, but he'd turned away before she could finish speaking. The rejection hadn't been formal. He hadn't bothered with the official words, hadn't even acknowledged the pup growing in her belly as his. But it had been absolute. Within a day, Clara had been moved from her small but comfortable cottage to a storage shed at the pack's edge. Within a week, the whispers had begun. Mateless, packless, worthless. Within 3 weeks, she'd become tribute. Another cramp seized her, this one sharp enough to tear a gasp from her throat. Clara curled forward, pressing her forehead against her knees as she rode out the wave of pain. Her wolf stirred sluggishly, trying to push healing energy toward their pup, but there was so little strength left to give. The rejection, the grief, the days of travel with minimal food, It had drained her reserves down to nothing. "Hey," a rough voice called from the front of the wagon. "Keep it quiet back there. We're entering Shadowmere territory." Clara lifted her head, blinking against the gray afternoon light that seeped through the canvas gap. Marcus, the warrior driving the wagon, didn't bother to look back at her. To him, she was cargo. Cargo didn't need concern or comfort. "Please," she managed, her voice cracking. "Something's wrong. The pup. I need a healer, please. I'll do anything." "You'll get a healer when we reach the Alpha's stronghold," Marcus cut her off. "Which will be never if you don't stop whining and let me focus on not driving us into a ditch." She wanted to scream at him that she might not make it to the stronghold, that she could feel her baby's distress pulsing through the fragile connection between mother and unborn child, that if they didn't stop right now, she might lose the only piece of her future that still mattered. But the words tangled in her throat, trapped behind a wall of exhaustion and despair. "This is what you are now," a vicious voice whispered in her mind. "Nothing. No one. A female so worthless that your own pack sold you to monsters to save their own skins. You don't get to make demands. You don't get to be saved." Clara squeezed her eyes shut and fought against the rising tide of hopelessness. She couldn't afford to break down. Not now. The pup needed her strong. The pup needed her to survive this journey, to face whatever horrors awaited at the end of it, to find some way to protect them both in a strange pack, led by an alpha whose very name made hardened warriors shudder. Eric Nightshade, the Broken King, the alpha who had watched his entire pack slaughtered 3 years ago, who had crawled out of the ashes of Shadowmere with nothing but rage and an iron will to rebuild. The stories painted him as more beast than man, a wolf so consumed by grief and vengeance that he'd lost touch with his humanity entirely. They said he'd built his new pack from rogues and criminals and outcasts, wolves with nothing to lose and everything to prove. They said the border war had started because he'd killed a Silverpine patrol that strayed too close to his territory, tearing them apart with his bare claws and leaving the pieces as a warning. They said he had no mercy for the weak. Clara pressed her hand more firmly against her belly, feeling the faint flutter of movement beneath her palm. "I won't let them hurt you," she promised silently. "Whatever I have to do, whatever I have to become, I will keep you safe, even if it kills me." The wagon lurched again, and this time the pain that shot through her was blinding. Clara cried out before she could stop herself, doubling over as white-hot agony radiated from her core. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. She could feel it now. Feel the way her pup's distress had shifted from fear to something closer to panic. The cord, she realized with dawning horror. The umbilical cord was wrapped around something it shouldn't be. Every jolt of the wagon was tightening the noose. "Stop!" she gasped, clawing at the wagon's side. "Stop the wagon! Please, you have to stop!" Marcus's curse was lost to the wind as the wagon wheels hit a patch of ice and slewed sideways. Clara was thrown against the crates, her shoulder slamming into hard wood with a crack that might have been bone. She barely felt it. The pain in her belly was all-consuming now, a red-hot fist squeezing the life out of her unborn child. "No. No, 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 please, not like this." The wagon ground to a halt. Clara heard voices outside, sharp and demanding, but she couldn't focus on the words. Her vision was tunneling, gray edges creeping in as her body began to shut down under the assault of panic and pain. She needed to move, needed to get out, needed to find help before it was too late. The canvas was ripped away, and cold air flooded over her. Clara blinked up at the figures silhouetted against the steel-gray sky, trying to force her wolf's eyes to focus. 3 of them. No. 4. Large males in dark leather armor, their expressions hard and suspicious as they surveyed the wagon's contents. "Supply tribute from Silverpine," Marcus was saying somewhere to her left, his voice tight with barely concealed fear. "As negotiated, provisions, weapons, and—" "Is that a person?" One of the Shadowmere warriors stepped closer, his brow furrowed. He was younger than the others, with a scar that bisected his left eyebrow and continued down his cheek. You brought us a person as tribute? Marcus's silence was answer enough. Get the Alpha, the scarred warrior said to one of his companions. Now. Clara tried to push herself upright, tried to gather enough strength to speak, to explain, to beg for help, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. The edges of her vision were going dark now, and she could feel her wolf howling in the depths of her mind, a sound of pure, primal terror that echoed the scream building in her own throat. She needed a healer. She needed someone to save her pup before it was too late. She needed. Heavy footsteps approached the wagon. Clara felt the presence before she saw it. A wave of power that rolled over her like a physical force, pressing against her skin, demanding acknowledgement. Her wolf, weak as she was, went instantly still, every instinct recognizing the proximity of an apex predator. And then, he was there, filling her narrowing field of vision like a force of nature. Eric Nightshade, Alpha of Shadowmere, stood at the edge of the wagon and looked down at her with eyes the color of molten amber. He was massive, easily a head taller than the warriors flanking him, with shoulders broad enough to block out the winter sky. His dark hair was tied back from a face carved from granite, all sharp angles and hard planes, a face that had known suffering and emerged harder for it. A thick scar curved from his temple to his jaw, silver white against his tanned skin. Everything about him screamed danger, but it was his eyes that held her. They saw through her skin to the desperate, terrified creature beneath. Clara opened her mouth to speak, to beg, to explain that she needed help, that her baby was dying, that she would do anything, give anything, if only someone would save her child. The pain crested one final time, and Clara's world went white. She felt herself falling, felt the rough wood of the wagon bed scraping against her back, felt the last threads of consciousness slipping through her fingers like water. The last thing she registered before the darkness claimed her was the sensation of hands, large, impossibly warm hands, catching her before she hit the ground. And then, like a bolt of lightning through a storm-dark sky, heat. It flooded through her veins, burning away the ice of fear and exhaustion that had frozen her blood for weeks. It sparked along her nerve endings, setting every inch of her skin ablaze with an awareness so acute it was almost painful. Her wolf surged to life with a howl that shook the foundations of her soul, a sound of recognition and longing and desperate, impossible hope. Through the haze of pain and fading consciousness, Clara heard a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. One word, spoken in a voice like gravel and smoke, heavy with shock, and something that sounded almost like reverence. Mate. And then the darkness pulled her under. Clara surfaced from the darkness slowly, like a drowning woman clawing her way toward distant light. Fragments of sensation filtered through the haze, warmth surrounding her, the soft give of a mattress beneath her aching body, the distant crackle of a fire, and pain. Always pain, though somehow muted now, a dull throb rather than the screaming agony that had consumed her in the wagon. Something stirred in the back of her mind first, an urgency Clara didn't understand, a primal awareness pressing against the edges of her consciousness. There was someone, nearby. Someone whose presence made every instinct in her body whine and strain with an emotion that felt dangerously close to yearning. Clara forced her eyes open. The room swam into focus gradually. Stone walls draped with heavy tapestries in deep greens and browns, a fire burning low in a massive hearth. Candles casting pools of golden light across a space that spoke of authority and comfort in equal measure. And beside the bed, close enough to touch, a figure that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. Eric Nightshade sat in a carved wooden chair, his massive frame somehow contained by its arms, his gaze fixed on her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle with heat. He hadn't moved when she opened her eyes. He simply watched, tracking every flutter of her lashes, every hitch in her breathing. "You're awake." His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together in a riverbed. "Don't try to move yet. The healer said the stress nearly killed you both." Both. Clara's hand flew to her belly, panic surging through her veins like ice water. But instead of the rigid, painful swelling she'd felt in the wagon, she found only the familiar curve of her pregnancy, soft and warm beneath the blankets. And there, a flutter of movement against her palm. A tiny kick. "My pup," she gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "The cord. Unwrapped." Eric leaned forward slightly, and Clara's wolf went absolutely still, every sense straining toward him. "My healer Miriam has a gift. Old magic. Older than the packs themselves. She found the cord wrapped twice around your pup's throat and eased it free without cutting, without scarring." His jaw tightened. Another hour, and it would have been too late. Relief crashed through Clara so hard it left her shaking. Her pup was alive. After everything, the rejection, the journey, the endless jolting of that cursed wagon, her baby had survived. She pressed both hands to her belly and felt another kick, stronger this time, as if her child was answering her silent plea. "Thank you," she whispered, not quite able to meet Eric's eyes. I can never. Look at me." The command in his voice wasn't harsh, but it was absolute. Clara's wolf responded before her mind could catch up, lifting her chin and meeting that unblinking stare. The heat hit her again, sudden and overwhelming. It was the same sensation she'd felt in the wagon, that lightning strike of warmth that had burned through her failing consciousness and set her blood on fire. But now, awake and aware, she could feel its full force. It started in her chest, a spark that quickly spread through her limbs, down her spine, into her very bones. Her skin tingled where his gaze touched it, as if his eyes alone could brand her. And her wolf was going insane. The creature that had been dormant and defeated for weeks was suddenly howling, pressing against Clara's control with a desperate need she'd never felt before. Recognition. That's what this feeling was. Her wolf recognized something in this terrifying alpha, something that called to the deepest, most primal part of her soul. "Mate," her wolf whimpered. "Mate, mate, mate." No, that was impossible. Mates were the stuff of old legends, rare bonds that most wolves never experienced. And even if such things did exist, they wouldn't happen to her. A packless, worthless nobody carrying another male's child. The universe didn't work that way. It didn't give broken things like her a second chance. But Eric's eyes had changed. The amber was bleeding into pure, molten gold, his pupils contracting to thin slits as a visible shudder ran through his massive frame. His hands gripped the arms of his chair hard enough to make the wood creak ominously, and Clara could see the tendon standing out in his neck as he fought for control. "You feel it," he said, and it wasn't a question. "The bond." Clara shook her head, but even as she denied it, another wave of heat washed through her. Her wolf was howling now, actually howling inside her mind, the sound so loud she was surprised Eric couldn't hear it. "This can't be real," she heard herself say. You can't possibly?" Eric moved, and despite his size, the motion was fluid as water, predator smooth. He didn't touch her, but he leaned closer, close enough that she could see every scar on his face in sharp detail, close enough to catch his scent. Pine and wood smoke and something wild, something that made her wolf strain toward him with shameless need. "When I touched you in that wagon," he said, his voice dropping to something barely above a growl, I felt my wolf wake for the first time in 3 years. 3 years of nothing but rage and grief, and the cold satisfaction of vengeance. And then you, pregnant and dying and thrown at my feet like garbage. You set my blood on fire with a single touch. His nostrils flared, and she knew he was breathing in her scent, cataloging it, memorizing it. I don't believe in fate. I stopped believing in anything the night I buried my pack. But this, I cannot deny. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Fear and confusion warred with something else, something her wolf recognized even if her mind refused to accept it. Longing. For the first time in months, she wanted something beyond survival. She wanted to lean into that heat, to let it consume her, to believe that maybe, just maybe, the universe hadn't abandoned her completely. But she was pregnant with another male's pup. She was tribute, sold by her own pack to appease a monster. She was nothing. "I'm carrying someone else's child," she whispered, the words tasting like ash on her tongue. "How can you? Why would you?" Eric's growl cut her off, low and rumbling and somehow not frightening at all. "The male who planted that seed in you abandoned you to die. He forfeited any claim the moment he turned his back." His gaze dropped to her belly, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like tenderness. "But you didn't abandon your pup. Even when your body was failing, even when you had nothing left, you fought to protect that life. That is the kind of strength a Luna needs." Luna. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Clara's wolf keened at the sound of it, at the promise it held. "You don't know me," Clara said, because she had to say something, had to find some way to ground herself in reality before she drowned in that impossible gaze. "I could be anything. A spy? A trap? A... You're my mate." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "I knew it the moment I touched you, and I know it now. My wolf has never been wrong about anything that mattered." He finally pulled back, giving her space to breathe, but his gaze never left her face. "I won't force this bond on you. You've been forced into enough, but I won't pretend it doesn't exist either." Clara lay there, trembling, trying to process the impossible thing that had just happened. Outside, she could hear the distant sounds of pack life, wolves moving, voices calling, the clang of metal on metal from what might have been a training yard. Inside this room, there was only the fire's crackle and the weight of a future she had never imagined. Her wolf settled slowly, still alert, still straining toward the alpha who sat mere feet away, but no longer howling. Instead, she felt a quiet certainty radiating from that primal part of herself, a certainty that said, this one is ours." Clara didn't know if she believed it yet, but for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel quite so alone. The healer came twice more that night, a small, silver-haired woman named Miriam, whose gentle hands and sharp eyes belied her age. She examined Clara's belly with practiced efficiency, checking the pup's heartbeat with her ear pressed to Clara's skin, her weathered face breaking into a smile at what she heard. "Strong little one," she pronounced. "Fighter, like the mother. The cord left no damage. I got there in time, thanks to our alpha's speed." Her eyes flicked to the corner of the room, where Eric still sat in his chair, and something knowing passed across her features. "He carried you in himself, you know. Wouldn't let anyone else touch you. Nearly tore Marcus's arm off when the fool tried to help." Clara's gaze darted to Eric, who met it without shame or apology. "You were dying," he said simply. "I wasn't going to entrust your life to the male who let you suffer in that wagon for 3 days." "Marcus didn't know," Clara found herself saying, though she wasn't sure why she was defending him. "He was just following orders." Orders to transport a pregnant female in a supply wagon without proper bedding, food, or medical care. Eric's voice was dangerously calm. Orders to ignore her pleas for help when her pup was strangling in the womb. Silverpine's orders were clear. Deliver the tribute alive. Marcus chose to interpret alive in the loosest possible terms. Clara fell silent. She thought of the cold, the hunger, the way Marcus had told her to keep quiet when she'd begged for help. She thought of the way her pack, her former pack, had looked through her as she was loaded into that wagon, as if she'd already ceased to exist. "What will happen to him?" she asked quietly. "He'll return to Silverpine with his wagon and his remaining supplies. The tribute exchange is complete." Eric's jaw tightened. "But if I ever see him on my territory again, I will make him answer for every hour you spent in pain." The protective fury in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent a spark of warmth through Clara's chest that had nothing to do with the mate bond. Miriam finished her examination and patted Clara's hand with a motherly gentleness that brought tears to Clara's eyes. "Rest now, pup. Your little one is safe, but you need to rebuild your strength. I'll bring broth in a few hours. Real broth, not the watered-down slop they were feeding you." She shot a withering glance at no one in particular, clearly referring to Silverpine's hospitality. Honestly, the way some packs treat their pregnant females, you'd think they'd forgotten where warriors come from. After Miriam left, Clara expected Eric to follow. He had an entire pack to run, surely. A pack of rogues and criminals and outcasts, if the stories were true. He couldn't possibly have time to sit vigil at the bedside of a stranger, mate bond or no mate bond. But Eric didn't leave. He simply shifted in his chair, settling into a position that suggested he planned to stay for a while, and picked up a stack of papers from the table beside him. "What are you doing?" Clara asked, unable to keep the confusion from her voice. "Pack correspondence, supply requisitions, territory reports, requests for audience." He flipped through the pages with a practiced eye. The work of an alpha never stops, even when his... He paused, as if catching himself. "Even when circumstances require his attention elsewhere." "You don't have to stay." The words came out smaller than she intended. "I'm safe now. Your healer said so. There's no reason for you to..." "I want to." 3 words, spoken without elaboration, without justification. Eric didn't look up from his papers, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers pressed just a little too hard against the parchment. He wanted to stay. The Alpha of Shadowmere, the Broken King, the wolf who had rebuilt an empire from ashes and corpses. He wanted to sit in an uncomfortable chair and read boring correspondence just to be near her. Clara's wolf practically purred at the realization. "You must think I'm pathetic," she said quietly, staring at the canopy above the bed rather than at him. A female who let herself be sold without even fighting back, who couldn't even protect her own pup from... "I think," Eric interrupted, his voice gentle but firm, "that you survived. That's not pathetic. That's extraordinary." Clara blinked back the tears that threatened to spill over. No one had called her extraordinary in a very long time. No one had called her anything but a burden, a disappointment, a problem to be disposed of. "Sleep," Eric said, and there was something almost tender in the command. "I'll be here when you wake." It shouldn't have been comforting. She was in a strange pack, surrounded by wolves she didn't know, bonded to an alpha whose reputation painted him as a barely controlled monster. But as Clara let her eyes drift closed, her wolf curled up contentedly in the back of her mind, soothed by the presence of the male who smelled like pine and safety. She slept, and for the first time in months, she didn't dream of falling. Dawn was breaking when Clara woke again, pale winter light seeping through heavy curtains to paint golden stripes across the stone floor. She blinked away the fog of sleep, her hand automatically going to her belly to check for movement. There, a gentle flutter, her pup greeting the morning. Eric was still there. He had moved at some point during the night, his chair now pushed back from the bed, his long legs stretched out before him. His eyes were closed, his breathing deep and even, and Clara had a moment to study him without the weight of his attention. Asleep, some of the hardness left his face. He was still massive, still scarred, still radiating an aura of power that made some deep part of her want to bare her throat in submission. But the lines around his eyes had softened, and his lips, full, surprisingly sensual lips, were parted slightly, vulnerable in a way she doubted he ever allowed when awake. He was beautiful, she realized with a jolt of surprise. Not handsome in the refined, cultured way Cale had been, with his perfect features and practiced charm. Eric's beauty was rougher, rawer, the beauty of a mountain or a storm, something wild and untamed and overwhelmingly present. Her wolf stirred at the thought, sending a wave of heat through Clara's core that made her cheeks flush. Down, she told the creature firmly. He's helping us. That's all. Don't make this complicated. But it was already complicated. The mate bond pulsed between them like a living thing, even in sleep, even with feet of distance separating their bodies. Clara could feel it in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or the blankets, a pull that urged her to close that distance, to touch him, to claim what her wolf insisted was hers by right. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Eric's eyes opening until his voice rumbled through the quiet room. Staring is rude, you know. Clara's face went crimson. I didn't. The corner of his mouth quirked upward, the barest suggestion of a smile. You were. I don't mind. He stretched, muscles rippling beneath his dark shirt, and Clara quickly looked away, her heart pounding. How do you feel? Better. It was true. The pain that had been her constant companion for days had faded to a manageable ache, and she could feel strength slowly returning to her limbs. Hungry. Good. That means you're healing. Eric rose from his chair and crossed to the door, opening it to speak quietly to someone outside. When he turned back, there was something in his expression that Clara couldn't quite read. Anticipation? Maybe? Or apprehension. There's something you should know, he said, before you leave this room. Clara pushed herself upright, ignoring the protest of her still weak muscles. What is it? Word has spread through the pack about what happened, about you. He paused, choosing his words carefully. About the bond. Of course it had. Clara's stomach sank. In a pack of rogues and outcasts, gossip was probably one of the few entertainments. The alpha's new mate, a pregnant tribute from an enemy pack, carrying another male's pup. She could only imagine what they were saying about her. They hate me, she said flatly. It wasn't a question. They don't know you yet. Eric moved toward the bed, then stopped, visibly restraining himself from coming closer. Some of them have opinions about the situation, about what my acceptance of you means for the pack. Clara laughed, and the sound was bitter even to her own ears. You mean they think you've lost your mind, that the great Alpha King has gone soft over a worthless female who— You are not worthless. The words cracked through the air like a whip, and Clara flinched despite herself. Eric's eyes had gone gold again, his wolf pushing to the surface with an intensity that made the air feel thick. You are not worthless, and I will not hear you speak of yourself that way. Not here. Not ever again. Clara stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. No one had ever defended her to herself before. No one had ever looked at her with such fierce certainty that she mattered. There will be a pack gathering tonight, Eric continued, his voice controlled again, though Clara could see the effort it cost him. A formal welcome. I will announce your status as my mate and Luna of Shadowmere. But I haven't agreed to— Clara started. I know. He held up a hand, forestalling her protest. I said I wouldn't force the bond on you, And I meant it. But the pack needs to know that you are under my protection. That any insult to you is an insult to me. It's the only way to keep you safe while you recover. Clara thought about that, turning it over in her mind. She thought about what it would mean to stand before a room full of hostile strangers and be proclaimed their Luna, pregnant belly and all. She thought about the whispers that would follow her, the sneers she would have to endure. But she also thought about her pup, about the life growing inside her that deserved a chance at safety, at belonging, at a future that didn't involve being sold or abandoned or thrown away. "All right," she said quietly, "if you think it's necessary." Something that might have been relief flickered across Eric's features. "Thank you." And Clara. He waited until she met his eyes. "Whatever happens tonight, whatever anyone says, remember, you are my mate. My wolf chose you. That is not nothing." It wasn't nothing. Clara's wolf stirred in agreement, pressing warmth against her heart like a promise. It wasn't nothing at all. The pack gathering was held in the great hall, a cavernous space that had clearly been rebuilt from the ruins of whatever stood there before. New timber beams supported a ceiling draped with hunting trophies and war banners, and long tables filled the floor, packed with wolves who fell silent the moment Clara entered. She walked beside Eric, acutely aware of every eye on her swollen belly, her travel-worn dress, her tangled hair that Miriam had done her best to tame. She felt like an imposter, a pretender to a throne she had no right to claim. But something stubborn inside her held her chin high, bolstered by the presence of the alpha at her side. They made it halfway across the hall before someone spoke. "This is what we fought a war for?" The voice was loud, meant to carry, and it came from a massive male with a shaved head and muscles that strained against his leather armor. A discarded breeder carrying another male's spawn? The silence that followed was absolute. Clara felt her face burn with humiliation, her hands instinctively cradling her belly as if she could shield her pup from the words. Eric stopped walking. "Garrett." His voice was calm, conversational even, but Clara could feel the power building in him like a storm gathering on the horizon. "Would you care to repeat that?" The big male, Garrett, seemed to realize his mistake, but pride or stupidity kept him talking. "I mean no disrespect to you, Alpha, but the pack is talking. They're wondering if you've gone soft, taking tribute from Silverpine instead of burning them to the ground, claiming a mate who was thrown away by her own people." He gestured at Clara, his lip curling. "She's carrying some other wolf's bastard, and you want us to bow to her as Luna?" The power that had been building in Eric detonated. It crashed through the hall like a physical force, a wave of alpha dominance so intense that wolves dropped to their knees throughout the room. Clara felt it wash over her too, but where it pressed others down, it seemed to wrap around her like a protective shield, warm and fierce and claiming. Eric didn't move toward Garrett. He didn't have to. His voice, when he spoke, was the voice of a king. Absolute, terrible, allowing no argument. "Let me make something very clear since some of you seem confused about the situation." His golden eyes swept the hall, and even the wolves already on their knees seemed to sink lower. "This female is my mate. My wolf recognized her the moment I touched her, and I will not deny what fate has given me. Not for your comfort, not for your expectations, not for anything." He paused, and Clara could see his chest heaving with the effort of controlling his rage. "As for the pup she carries..." Eric turned his gaze back to Garrett, who had gone pale beneath his tan. "Any pup of my mate's is my pup. The male who sired it abandoned them both to die. He forfeited any claim the moment he turned his back. From this day forward, that child is mine. Mine to protect, mine to provide for, mine to raise as my own. And if anyone suggests otherwise, they will answer to my teeth." The hall was utterly silent now. not even a breath disturbing the air. Clara Nightshade is Luna of Shadowmere. Eric's voice rang off the stone walls like a pronouncement from the gods themselves. She will be treated with the respect due to my mate and the mother of my heir. Anyone who disrespects her, insults her, or causes her a moment's distress will be dealt with personally. By me. He turned to Garrett, who was still kneeling, his head bowed, sweat beading on his shaved scalp. Do we understand each other? Yes, Alpha. The words came out strangled, barely audible. I apologize. To you. And to... He swallowed hard. To the Luna. Eric stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once, curtly. See that it doesn't happen again. The power receded slowly, like a tide withdrawing from the shore, and the wolves in the hall gradually rose to their feet. But the message had been delivered, clear and unmistakable. Clara was protected. Clara was claimed. And anyone who crossed that line would face the full wrath of the Broken King. Clara stood frozen, her heart pounding, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. No one had ever defended her like that. Not her pack, not Kale, not anyone. And here was this terrifying, scarred alpha, a male she'd known for less than a day, standing before his entire pack and declaring her worthy. Declaring her child worthy. When Eric turned back to her, his expression had softened, the hard edges giving way to something almost gentle. Are you all right? He asked quietly, too low for anyone else to hear. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Something was singing inside her chest, pressing against her heart with an emotion that felt dangerously close to love. Come, Eric said, offering his hand. Let me show you to your seat. Tonight, we feast. Tomorrow, we begin rebuilding. Together. Clara looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and scarred and so much larger than her own. She thought about everything she'd lost. Her pack, her mate, her future. She thought about everything she'd been told she was. Worthless, common, disposable. And then she thought about the way Eric had looked at her in that wagon, when she was dying and broken and had nothing left to offer. The way he'd said mate, like it was a prayer. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and gentle despite their size, and Clara felt something shift inside her chest. A door opening, maybe. A wall coming down. The first fragile stirrings of trust taking root in the barren soil of her heart. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if this bond was real or some cruel trick of fate. But as Eric led her through the hall, past the bowing heads of wolves who now saw her as something more than tribute, Clara allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place to belong. The feast hall glowed with warmth and firelight, the long tables laden with more food than Clara had seen in months. Roasted venison, fresh bread still steaming from the ovens, root vegetables glistening with butter and herbs. The scent of it all made her stomach growl audibly, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks when Eric glanced down at her with a hint of amusement softening his scarred features. "When did you last eat properly?" he asked, guiding her toward the raised dais where two chairs sat side by side, overlooking the hall. Clara tried to remember. The journey from Silverpine had taken 3 days, and the guards hadn't been generous with rations. Before that, she'd been confined to her small room in the pack house, meals delivered sporadically and always cold. I'm not sure, she admitted quietly. It's been a while. Something flickered in Eric's eyes. Anger, quickly suppressed. Then tonight you eat your fill. No one will rush you, and no one will judge. He pulled out her chair himself, waiting until she was settled before taking his own seat beside her. The hall had filled while they'd been dealing with Garrett's challenge, wolves of all ages finding their places at the long tables below. Clara noticed how they arranged themselves, families clustered together, unmated wolves in loose groups. elderly pack members given the seats closest to the fire. There was an order to it, a sense of belonging that made her chest ache with longing. Miriam appeared at Clara's elbow, setting down a plate piled high with the choicest cuts of meat and the freshest bread. "The pup needs nourishment," the healer said firmly, brooking no argument. "And so does the mother. Eat, Luna. Build your strength." Luna. The title still felt foreign, like a borrowed dress that didn't quite fit. Clara looked down at her plate, then at the assembled pack, then at Eric beside her. His attention was on his people, his gaze sweeping the hall with the alertness of a predator always watching for threats, but his hand rested on the arm of his chair closest to her, as if ready to reach for her at a moment's notice. She picked up her fork and began to eat. The first bite was revelatory. Tender meat, perfectly seasoned, melting on her tongue. Clara hadn't realized how hungry she was until that moment, and then she couldn't stop. She ate steadily, methodically, feeling strength returning to her limbs with every mouthful. The pup kicked approvingly, and she pressed a hand to her belly with a small smile. "They like the venison," she murmured, not really meaning to speak aloud. Eric turned to look at her, and his expression softened in a way that made her heart stutter. "A wolf of good taste, then." The deer came from the eastern hunting grounds, some of the finest game in the territory. "You hunted it yourself?" "This morning, before dawn." He paused, something almost shy flickering across his features. I wanted the feast to be worthy of the occasion." Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the food. He had hunted for this meal, for her welcome. This fearsome alpha who commanded an entire pack had risen before dawn to ensure she would have the best he could offer. The meal continued, conversation flowing around them. Clara remained mostly quiet, observing, learning the dynamics of this strange new pack. She noticed how Eric's warriors deferred to him with genuine respect rather than fear, how the children weren't hushed when they laughed too loudly, how the elderly were served first and given the warmest seats. It was so different from Silverpine, where hierarchy meant cruelty and power meant oppression. She was just beginning to relax, to let her guard down, when the doors at the far end of the hall burst open. A young wolf stumbled in, breathless, his clothing torn and blood seeping from a gash on his forehead. "Alpha!" he gasped, barely managing to stay upright. "Riders approaching. From the south. They carry the banner of Starfall." The name hit Clara like a physical blow. Starfall. So Cale had actually done it. Left Silverpine after the scandal and seized control of the minor border pack his mother's family had once led. He'd talked about it for years, building his own dynasty, but Clara had never believed he'd follow through. Apparently, losing his convenient breeding partner had lit a fire under his ambition. Her fork clattered to her plate, her vision tunneling, her breath stopping in her chest. No, not here. Not now. She'd thought she was free. She'd thought. Eric was on his feet instantly, his hand finding her shoulder, grounding her. "How many?" "A dozen, maybe more. They're not attacking. They come under a banner of parley." "Parley?" Eric's voice was flat, dangerous. "And who leads them?" The young wolf's eyes darted to Clara, then back to his alpha. "Cale Starfall himself, my lord. He demands the return of his mate." The word mate fell into the silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled wolves. Clara felt every eye in the hall turn to her, felt the weight of their questions and their doubt pressing against her skin like physical force. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Cale was here. Cale, who had rejected her, abandoned her, sold her to die. Cale, who had looked at her with disgust when he learned she wasn't pure-blooded noble, who had called her worthless, he rejected her. Eric's voice cut through her spiraling panic, sharp and certain. His hand remained on her shoulder, warm and steady, an anchor in the storm. He rejected the bond and cast her out. She is no longer his in any way that matters, by any law that exists. She is mine. The words rumbled through the hall like distant thunder. And I will hear his demands, if only to refuse them to his face. Clara looked up at Eric, her eyes wide, her heart pounding. You don't have to. I can go. If it will protect your pack, I can. No. The word was absolute, allowing no argument. Eric knelt beside her chair, bringing his face level with hers, every line of his body radiating a fierce intensity that stole her breath. You will never have to run again, Clara. Not from him. Not from anyone. I swore to protect you. And I meant it. He reached up, his scarred hand incredibly gentle as he cupped her cheek. Will you trust me? Clara searched his face, looking for deception, for hidden motives, for any sign that he would betray her the way Cale had. She found nothing but unwavering determination and something deeper. Something that looked almost like devotion. Yes, she whispered. I trust you. Eric nodded once, then rose to his full height. When he turned to face the hall, his expression had transformed into something cold and imperious, the mask of a king preparing for war. Let them enter, he commanded, and let Cale Starfall see what becomes of males who discard what they should have treasured. The wait seemed to stretch for hours, though it could only have been minutes. Clara remained in her seat at Eric's insistence, his warriors forming a protective half-circle around the dais. She could feel the tension in the room, the barely restrained aggression of wolves ready to fight for their alpha and their new Luna. It should have terrified her, but instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Protection. True, genuine protection, given freely, expecting nothing in return. When the doors opened again, Clara's heart stopped. Cale Starfall strode into the hall like he owned it, his golden hair gleaming in the firelight, his handsome face arranged in an expression of arrogant confidence. He was everything she remembered. Tall, broad-shouldered, beautiful in the way of cruel things, all sharp edges and cold perfection. Behind him came his guards, each one bristling with weapons and barely concealed hostility. His eyes found her immediately, and Clara saw something flash across his features: possession, hunger, calculation. Not love, never love. She wondered now if he had ever felt anything real for her, or if she had simply been a convenient vessel for his needs. Clara. His voice was smooth, charming, exactly as she remembered from the days when she had thought herself beloved. My darling, you must have been so frightened, taken from your home, forced to come to this. His gaze swept the hall with obvious disdain. This place. But I'm here now. I've come to take you back where you belong. Clara opened her mouth to respond, but Eric spoke first. She belongs here. The Alpha of Shadowmere didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. His power filled the hall like water filling a vessel, pressing against everyone present with the weight of absolute authority. You rejected her, Starfall, cast her out, sold her as tribute. By the old laws and the new, she is no longer yours. Cale's smile didn't waver, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. A misunderstanding, I assure you. My pack acted without my knowledge. I was devastated to learn Clara had been taken from me. He stepped forward, hands spread in a gesture of peace. Surely you can understand. She carries my pup. My heir. I have a right to reclaim what's mine. Your pup? Eric's voice was ice. You forfeited any claim to that child when you abandoned its mother to die. I never... You did. Eric descended from the dais, each step measured and deliberate, predator stalking prey. I've heard the full account. You rejected her bond because her blood wasn't pure enough for your noble standards. You left her to be sold like livestock. And now you come here, to my hall, demanding her return? He stopped directly in front of Kyle, and Clara could see the difference between them. Kyle was tall, but Eric was taller. Kale was beautiful, but Eric was something more dangerous. Genuine. Tell me why I shouldn't tear your throat out where you stand. For the first time, Kale's mask slipped, revealing the fear beneath. But he recovered quickly, his charm sliding back into place like armor. Because I have something you want. He reached into his cloak and withdrew a sealed scroll, holding it up for all to see. A petition to the High Council, signed by 20 noble packs. It accuses you of harboring rogues, criminals, and oath-breakers, of building your new pack from the dregs of our society. His smile turned sharp, triumphant. If I send this, Shadowmere will be investigated, sanctioned, perhaps even destroyed. Again. The silence in the hall was absolute. Clara felt ice spreading through her veins, freezing her from the inside out. She looked at the wolves around her. Wolves who had been given second chances here, who had found family and purpose in a place that welcomed those the world had discarded. If Kale's petition succeeded. What do you want? Eric's voice was controlled, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the clench of his jaw. Clara. Kale's eyes found hers again, and she saw the truth there, the cold calculation of a male who viewed her as property, as a means to an end. Return her to me, and the petition disappears. Refuse, and I destroy everything you've built. Eric didn't respond immediately. He turned to look at Clara, and in his gaze she saw the question he wouldn't voice aloud, the choice he was laying at her feet. She thought about everything she'd seen in her brief time here. The wolves who called this place home. The children who played in the courtyard. Miriam, who had saved her pup's life without asking for anything in return. Eric, who had defended her before his entire pack, who had declared her child his own, who had looked at her like she was precious. She thought about going back to Kale, back to cold beds and colder eyes, to being tolerated rather than wanted, to raising her child in a pack that would never see them as worthy. No. The word came out stronger than she expected, ringing through the hall with a certainty she hadn't known she possessed. Clara rose from her chair, one hand resting protectively on her belly, and faced the male who had nearly destroyed her. I won't go with you, Kyle. Not now. Not ever. Her voice didn't waver. You rejected me. You threw me away. You don't get to change your mind because it's convenient. Something ugly twisted Kale's beautiful features. You don't have a choice. You're mine. I was never yours. Clara stepped forward and she felt Eric's presence at her back, solid and unwavering. You never wanted me. You wanted a breeding partner with acceptable bloodlines, and when I didn't fit your requirements, you discarded me without a second thought. She raised her chin, meeting his eyes without flinching. I am not your mate. I am not your property. And my child will never know you as anything but the coward who abandoned us. Kale's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful. Choose your next words carefully. Eric's hand came to rest on Clara's shoulder, warm and possessive. You're speaking to the Luna of Shadowmere. The silence stretched, tension thick enough to choke on. Clara could feel her heart pounding, could feel the pup kicking frantically as if sensing her distress, could feel the invisible thread between her and Eric pulled taut as a bowstring. Finally, Kale stepped back. His charming mask was gone entirely now, replaced by cold fury and something that looked almost like hatred. This isn't over, he said softly, dangerously. You've made a powerful enemy today, Nightshade. Both of you. His eyes found Clara's one last time. I'll have what's mine, one way or another. He turned and strode from the hall, his guards falling in behind him. The doors slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the silent space. Clara's knees buckled. Eric caught her before she could fall, gathering her against his chest with infinite gentleness. I have you, he murmured against her hair. I have you. You were magnificent. I was terrified, she admitted, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. His hand stroked down her back, soothing, steadying. It means you stand your ground anyway. Clara let herself lean into him, let herself take comfort from his warmth and his strength. Around them, the pack began to move again, voices rising in worried murmurs, but she couldn't focus on any of it. Cale would be back. She knew him well enough to understand that his pride wouldn't allow him to accept defeat. Whatever scheme he was planning, whatever he truly wanted from her, he wouldn't stop until he had it. But as Eric held her, as she felt the connection between them burning steadier with every breath, Clara made a decision. She was done running. Done being afraid. Done being the victim of other people's cruelty. Whatever came next, she would face it. And this time, she wouldn't face it alone. The days that followed Cale's departure were tense with waiting. Eric doubled the patrols on Shadowmere's borders, stationed guards at every entrance, and kept Clara close whenever possible. She should have felt suffocated by the constant attention, but instead, she found herself grateful for it. Not because she was afraid, but because it meant she was never truly alone. 3 nights after the confrontation, Clara couldn't sleep. The pup was restless, kicking and rolling, and her mind wouldn't quiet. She found herself wandering the corridors of the pack house, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floors. The moonlight streaming through the windows painted everything in shades of silver and shadow. Clara paused at a large window overlooking the courtyard, watching the clouds drift across the moon's face. Couldn't sleep? She turned to find Eric emerging from the shadows, dressed simply in loose pants and nothing else. The scars crossing his chest were silver in the moonlight, a roadmap of survival and suffering. Clara's breath caught at the sight of him, not from fear, but from something else entirely. Something warm and wanting that she was only beginning to understand. "The pup is restless," she said softly, "and my thoughts won't settle." Eric moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Cale?" "Partly." Clara looked down at her belly, where her child grew and flourished, safe for now, but threatened by a male who saw them only as commodities. "I keep thinking about what he said. Why now? He rejected me months ago. Why come back?" Eric was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "There's something he's not telling us. A male like that doesn't travel to enemy territory with threats unless the stakes are high. My bloodline isn't noble. My family has no power, no wealth. What could I possibly have that he wants?" "You," Eric said simply. When Clara looked up at him, confused, he elaborated. "You, Clara. Whatever you have, whatever you are, it's worth more than noble blood to him. Worth enough to risk war." Clara shook her head. "I'm nobody. I've never been anything special." Eric turned to face her fully, and his scarred hand came up to cup her cheek with devastating tenderness. "That's what they made you believe. But I've watched you, Clara. The way my pack already looks to you for guidance. The way Miriam speaks about the healing that happened when she saved your pup. Healing, she says, she's never seen before." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Miriam has a theory, actually. She thinks your mother's line may have carried a dormant healing gift. The kind that can skip generations, sleeping in the blood until the right circumstances wake it. Your father, whoever he was, may have carried the same. 2 dormant lines meeting in you, then passing to the pup amplified." Clara's breath caught. "That's why the bloodline test came back common. The healers who ran it were looking for noble house markers. They wouldn't have recognized a wild gift if it was staring them in the face." "Exactly." Eric's voice softened. "There is something extraordinary inside you, Clara. I don't know the full shape of it yet, but I intend to help you discover it." Clara's heart was racing, every nerve in her body straining toward him. The air between them hummed with need and promise and burgeoning love. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much? You barely know me." "I know enough." Eric's voice was rough with emotion. "I know you're brave enough to stand before your abuser and refuse him. I know you're kind enough to thank the servants who bring your meals. I know you're strong enough to survive everything that's been done to you and still have softness left in your heart." He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "And I know that my wolf recognized you from the first moment, not just as mate, but as the other half of my soul." Clara's eyes burned with tears. "I don't know how to trust this," she admitted. "I thought I had love before, and it was a lie. How do I know this is real?" "You don't," Eric said honestly. "Not yet. But I'll prove it to you, Clara. Every day, in every way I can, until you believe it. Until you feel it as certainly as I do." He pulled back slightly, giving her space. Always giving her space. "I won't rush you. I won't claim anything you're not ready to give. But I want you to know, I'm not going anywhere. No matter what Kale threatens, no matter what comes, I will stand beside you." A tear slipped down Clara's cheek, and Eric caught it with his thumb. "May I hold you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. He gathered her against his chest, one arm around her shoulders, the other hand resting gently on her belly where the pup had finally stilled. Clara pressed her face into the warm skin of his chest and let herself feel safe. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in moonlight and each other, two broken souls slowly learning what it meant to be whole. It happened 4 days later, without warning. Clara was in the healing house with Miriam, learning about the herbs used for difficult pregnancies, when the first scream echoed from the courtyard. Within seconds, chaos erupted. Wolves were running, shouting, transforming. Clara ran to the window and saw warriors forming defensive lines. Saw fire. Diversionary fire, she realized, set to pull defenders away from the interior buildings. The stables, the kitchens, the guard towers. Everything designed to pull Eric's warriors away from her. "We're under attack," Miriam breathed. Clara's blood turned to ice. "Kale." Another scream, closer this time. Clara turned to see a young wolf, barely more than a pup herself, stumble through the healing house door, clutching her arm, blood streaming between her fingers. "They're everywhere," the girl gasped. "Coming through the walls. There was something wrong with the evening meal. Half the warriors are sick." Poison. He'd poisoned them. Clara remembered the whispers she'd heard over the past days, the strange visitors to pack members' homes, the way some of the wolves had looked at her with sudden suspicion. Kale had been here all along, or his agents had been, turning them against each other, weakening them from within. "Clara, you need to hide." Miriam was already gathering supplies, her weathered hands sure despite the fear in her eyes. "The Alpha will come for you." "I can't hide." Clara moved to the injured girl, ripping a strip from her own dress to bandage the wound. "There are people hurt. I have to—" A crash of splintering wood, and suddenly there were wolves in the healing house. Strange wolves, their eyes wild, their teeth bared. Behind them, framed in the doorway by flames and chaos, stood Kale Starfall. "Hello, Clara." His beautiful face was twisted with triumph. "Did you really think I would let you go so easily?" Clara stepped back, putting herself between Kale and the injured girl, between Kale and Miriam. Her hand went to her belly, to the pup kicking frantically within her. "What do you want?" she demanded. "I told you." Kyle stepped closer, his eyes raking over her with possessive hunger. "What's mine? Or rather, what's inside you? Do you know how rare it is, Clara? The gift your pup carries? Healing magic that powerful hasn't been seen in generations. Kings would pay fortunes for it. Entire packs would swear allegiance for a taste of that power." Understanding crashed over Clara like a wave. That's why you came back. That's why you want us. You found out about the magic. A seer told me. Kale's smile was sharp as a blade. 3 days after I cast you out, she came to me with a prophecy. She said the child you carry would have the power to heal or destroy entire armies, to turn the tide of wars, to make whoever controls them the most powerful force in the realm. He reached for her. And I intend to control them. Over my dead body. Eric's voice came from somewhere behind the invaders, and then the world exploded into violence. The Alpha of Shadowmere hit Kale's wolves like a storm breaking, all teeth and claws and unstoppable fury. His warriors poured in behind him, the sick ones pale and shaking but fighting anyway, driven by loyalty and desperation. Clara was grabbed, pulled, pushed. She couldn't tell what was happening, couldn't see through the chaos of battle. Someone had her arm, dragging her away from the fighting. She struggled, kicked, tried to break free. And then Kale was there, his fingers digging into her arm, yanking her against him. His other hand clamped over her mouth before she could scream. "Stop fighting!" he hissed, all pretense of charm gone. "You're coming with me, Clara. Your precious Alpha won't reach us in time." Clara struggled against his grip, could feel his fingers bruising her arm, could feel the frantic kicking of her pup, the mate bond screaming in her chest. Something inside her answered. It started in her belly, where the pup fought for life. A warmth, spreading outward, growing, burning. Clara felt power surge through her veins, power she had never known she possessed, power that tasted like light and life and desperate, protective love. She looked into Kale's eyes and saw his triumph turn to confusion, then fear. "What?" he started. Clara didn't let him finish. She raised her hands, pressed them against his chest, and pushed. The light that exploded from her palms was blinding. Kale flew backward through the air, his body slamming into the stone wall of the healing house with a sickening crack. The golden light that had erupted from Clara's palms continued to pulse outward in waves, pushing back the enemy wolves, creating a barrier of pure, radiant energy between her and the chaos of battle. Clara stood trembling, her hands still raised, staring at the light flowing from her fingertips. It didn't feel like her power. It felt like something borrowed, something given freely by the tiny life inside her. The pup was still kicking, but the movements had changed from frantic thrashing to something almost rhythmic, as if the child was channeling energy directly through Clara's veins. "What are you?" Kyle gasped, struggling to rise from the rubble. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, and his eyes were wild with a mixture of fear and greed. "That power. It's even stronger than the seer predicted. Do you have any idea what you're worth now?" Clara's voice came out stronger than she expected. "I am not a thing to be bought or sold. I am not a vessel for you to use. I am Luna of Shadowmere, and you will never touch my child." The words rang through the healing house, through the courtyard beyond, carrying on the wind to every wolf locked in combat. Clara felt them settle into her bones like truth, like prophecy, like the first words she had ever spoken that truly mattered. Across the battlefield, Eric's head snapped up. Through their bond, Clara felt his surge of pride and terror intertwined, felt him fighting desperately to reach her through the press of enemy warriors. His voice echoed in her mind, raw with emotion. "Clara, my mate, hold on." But she didn't need to hold on, she needed to act. The injured girl behind her whimpered, and Clara became aware of the wounded all around her, Shadowmere wolves who had been poisoned, who had dragged themselves into battle anyway, who were falling faster than they could fight. Miriam was pressing cloths to wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding, her face pale with exhaustion and despair. Clara made her choice. She stepped forward, out of the healing house, into the chaos of the courtyard. The golden light around her expanded, spreading across the cobblestones like dawn breaking over dark water. Everywhere it touched, wounded wolves gasped and staggered, not from pain, but from its sudden absence. Cuts sealed, broken bones knitted, the poison burning through their veins turned to harmless ash. Clara. No. Eric's roar cut through the noise of battle, and she felt his anguish through the bond. He couldn't reach her. There were too many enemies between them, and she was walking directly into the heart of the conflict. She didn't stop. Every step she took, another warrior rose from where they had fallen. Every pulse of light that flowed from her hands, another life, was saved. Clara could feel the power draining from her, could feel her muscles trembling with exhaustion, but she couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. Not when her pack needed her. Her pack. The thought rang through her like a bell. These wolves who had taken her in, who had bowed their heads and called her Luna, who were fighting and dying to protect her and her unborn child. They were hers now, and she would not abandon them. Kale scrambled to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "Stop her!" he screamed at his warriors. "Capture her! She's worth nothing if she exhausts herself to death!" 3 wolves lunged for Clara. She raised her hands and the light blazed brighter, forming a barrier that sent them tumbling back. But the effort cost her. She felt something tear inside her, felt the power flicker and dim. The pup's movements slowed, and for one terrifying moment Clara thought she had pushed too far. "No," she thought fiercely, "not yet. We're not done yet." The pup responded with a surge of warmth, flooding her with renewed strength. It was as if the child understood, as if they were working together, mother and unborn child united in purpose. Clara pressed forward. She found Garrett first, the warrior who had stood before the entire pack and called her a discarded breeder. He was on his knees, blood pouring from a wound in his side, 3 enemy wolves circling him with hungry eyes. Clara thrust her hands toward him, and golden light wrapped around his body like armor. The wound sealed. He gasped, staggering to his feet, and their eyes met. "Luna," he breathed, and there was no doubt in his voice now. Only awe. Only loyalty. "Fight!" Clara commanded, and he threw himself back into battle with renewed fury. She healed them all, every fallen warrior she could reach, every wounded wolf who had given their blood for Shadowmere. The light flowed from her in endless waves, and Clara felt herself becoming something more than she had ever been. Not just a discarded Omega, not just a pregnant tribute, but a force of nature, a healer, a Luna. The tide of battle turned. Kale's forces, already struggling against Eric's rebuilt pack, began to falter as warriors they had struck down rose again and again. Fear spread through their ranks like wildfire. Some broke and ran. Others threw down their weapons and begged for mercy. Through it all, Clara kept walking toward Kale. He was backing away now, his handsome face twisted with disbelief. "This isn't possible," he snarled. "You are nothing. You are worthless. I threw you away like garbage." "You did," Clara agreed. Her voice was calm, steady, certain. "You threw me away because I wasn't noble enough, because my blood wasn't pure enough, because I was pregnant and inconvenient, and you never loved me at all. I would have kept you if I'd known. That's the point." Clara stopped, 3 feet from the man who had once been her world and felt nothing but cold clarity. "You only want me because of what I can give you, what my child can give you. You never saw me as a person, just a vessel, just a thing to be used." "Clara," Kale's voice changed, sliding into the honeyed tones she remembered so well. "I made a mistake, I admit that. But we can start over. Think of what we could build together, with your power and my ambition. We could rule entire kingdoms." "I don't want kingdoms," Clara said quietly. "I want a home. I want a mate who sees me, not what I can give him. I want a father for my child who will love them for who they are, not what power they possess." She met Kale's eyes, and for the first time in her life, she felt no fear of him. I reject you, Kale Starfall, completely and forever. I choose Eric Nightshade as my true mate. The words rang across the battlefield with the weight of prophecy. Every wolf present, Shadowmere and Starfall alike, heard them. And in that moment, Clara felt the last threads of what she'd once felt for Kale. The longing, the grief, the hollow ache of rejection, crumble to dust. Kale's face contorted with fury. You ungrateful? He lunged for her throat, claws extended, teeth bared. He never reached her. Eric hit him from the side like a thunderbolt, 200 pounds of enraged alpha wolf crashing into Kale with devastating force. They rolled across the cobblestones in a tangle of teeth and claws, snarling and snapping, blood spraying the stones. Clara stumbled back, her energy finally faltering. The golden light around her flickered and dimmed as exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She sank to her knees, one hand pressed to her belly, breathing hard. But she didn't look away from the fight. Eric was magnificent in his fury, all coiled power and lethal grace, his wolf form massive and dark against Kyle's golden pelt. He moved like shadow, like death, every strike deliberate and devastating. Kale fought back with desperate ferocity, but he had been bred for politics, for manipulation, for power plays in gilded halls. Eric had been forged in the fires of loss, tempered by the massacre of his entire pack, rebuilt from nothing but determination and hope. There was no contest. Within minutes, Eric had Kale pinned beneath him, massive jaws locked around the smaller alpha's throat. Kale whimpered, struggling weakly, his claws scrabbling uselessly against Eric's flanks. Eric shifted just enough to speak, his voice rough and deadly. She was never yours. She's nothing, Kale gasped. A worthless Omega, carrying a bastard pup. Eric's jaws tightened. That worthless Omega just saved my entire pack. That bastard pup is mine in every way that matters. And you? His golden eyes blazed. You are nothing. Yield or die. For a moment, Kale was silent. Then he spat blood into Eric's face. I will never yield to a mongrel alpha who rules over rogues and criminals. The High Council will hear of this. They'll burn your precious Shadowmere to ash. Eric's jaws clamped down. The sound of Kale Starfall's neck breaking echoed across the silent courtyard. His body went limp, his golden eyes empty, his ambition and cruelty finally ended. Clara watched without flinching. She had expected to feel something. Guilt, perhaps, or horror, or grief for the man she had once thought she loved. But all she felt was a profound sense of release, as if chains she had worn so long she'd forgotten their weight had finally fallen away. It was over. She was free. Eric shifted back to human form and walked toward her, uncaring of his nakedness, uncaring of the blood that stained his skin. His eyes never left hers. When he reached her, he dropped to his knees in front of her, taking her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. Clara. His voice broke on her name. You impossible, magnificent, terrifying woman. You could have died. You should have stayed hidden. They needed me, she whispered. The pack needed me. I needed you. He pressed his forehead to hers, and she felt his body trembling with the aftermath of battle and terror. When I saw you walking into the fighting, when I couldn't reach you, his breath shuddered. I have never been so afraid in my life, not when my pack was slaughtered. Not when I thought I would spend eternity alone. Nothing compared to watching you put yourself in danger. Clara lifted her hand to his face, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. I'm sorry I frightened you. But I couldn't hide while our people were dying. I couldn't let you fight alone. Our people, he repeated, and something in his expression softened into wonder. You said it. Our people. I am Luna of Shadowmere, Clara said, and the words felt right in a way nothing ever had before. I chose this. I choose you. I choose all of it. Eric made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and crushed her against his chest. Around them, the aftermath of battle continued. Wounded being tended, prisoners being secured, fires being extinguished. But for a long moment, Clara and Eric simply held each other in the center of the courtyard, breathing in sync, letting the terror and adrenaline slowly drain away. Garrett approached, limping slightly despite Clara's healing. He stopped a respectful distance away and cleared his throat. Alpha, Luna. Starfall's remaining forces have surrendered. The few who fled won't get far. Our border patrols will intercept them before dawn. Eric raised his head but didn't release Clara. Casualties? Minimal, thanks to the Luna. Garrett's voice carried a weight of respect that hadn't been there before. 4 wounded, none seriously. 2 would be dead if she hadn't. He trailed off, shaking his head in wonder. I've never seen anything like it. The light that came from her. It was like watching the sun itself heal our warriors. It wasn't just me, Clara said softly. It was the pup. We did it together. Garrett's gaze dropped to her belly and his expression shifted. When he looked up again, his eyes were bright. Then Shadowmere is blessed twice over, with a Luna who would walk into battle for us, and a pup who lends their power to protect us before they're even born. He dropped to one knee. I was wrong to question you, Luna. I was wrong to doubt. You have my loyalty, now and always. Other wolves were gathering now, drawn by Garrett's words. One by one they knelt, warriors still bloody from battle, healers with herb-stained hands, young wolves barely old enough to shift. They knelt before Clara with reverence in their eyes, and she felt the weight of their loyalty settle over her like a mantle. Rise, she said, her voice thick with emotion. All of you. We're pack. Family. We don't kneel to each other. They rose, but the respect in their eyes remained. Clara slept for nearly 2 days after the battle. She woke in fragments. Miriam's cool hands checking her pulse, Eric's low voice somewhere nearby, the pup stirring drowsily inside her. When she finally surfaced fully, the chaos had been cleaned away. Bodies removed, fires rebuilt in their proper hearths, the injured recovering in Miriam's healing house. The pack carried on, as packs do. On the 3rd evening, when Clara's strength had returned enough that Miriam grudgingly allowed her to walk the corridors again, Eric led her to his chambers. The room was warm with firelight, quiet in a way that felt deliberate, a space set apart from everything that had happened. He helped her settle onto the bed, propping pillows behind her back, fussing over her with an intensity that made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. I'm rested, Eric, she assured him, properly rested. Miriam wouldn't have let me out of that bed otherwise. The pup is fine too. I can feel them sleeping. Eric sat on the edge of the bed, his hand finding her belly with practiced ease. His expression was unreadable, his jaw tight. You terrified me in that battle. I know. You were magnificent. Clara's breath caught. Eric. I need... He stopped, swallowed hard. I need to ask you something, and I need you to know that whatever you answer, it changes nothing between us. You are my mate, my Luna. That is fixed, certain, eternal. But what I want to ask you... He looked up, and she saw something she had never expected to find in the Broken King. Vulnerability, raw and unguarded. I want to mark you. I want to claim you fully, to bind our souls so completely that nothing can ever separate us. But only if you want it. Only if you're ready. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The mate bond between them pulsed with Eric's hope, his fear, his desperate love. She reached for his face, cupping his jaw in her hands, and pulled him toward her, until their lips were a breath apart. "I've been ready," she whispered, "since the moment you caught me when I fell." Eric's exhale was shaky with relief and desire. "You're certain? After everything you've been through today?" "I'm certain." She tilted her head, baring the curve of her neck to him. "Claim me, Eric. Make me yours. Make us whole." He groaned low in his throat, and then his mouth was on hers, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness he had been holding back. Clara melted into him, her fingers threading through his hair, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, turned desperate, and she felt his hands on her body, reverent, careful, worshipful. "I love you," he breathed against her lips. "I love you, Clara. I love your strength and your courage and your impossible, stubborn heart. I love the way you walked into battle for our pack. I love the way you look at me like I'm worth something. I love you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too. I didn't know I could. After Kale, I thought. But you, Eric, you showed me what love is supposed to be. Gentle, patient, safe." He kissed her tears away, one by one. Then his mouth traced a path down her jaw, along the column of her throat, to the junction where her neck met her shoulder. He paused there, his breath hot against her skin, and Clara felt every nerve ending in her body alight with anticipation. "This will hurt," he warned, his voice rough. "Just for a moment, and then—" "I know," she said. "I want it. I want to feel you in my soul." Eric's teeth sank into her flesh. The pain was sharp and bright, stealing her breath, making her gasp and arch against him. But even as it flared, it began to change, transforming from agony to something else entirely. Pleasure bloomed from the bite, radiating outward through her entire body, warm and golden and overwhelming. Clara cried out, her hands fisting in Eric's hair, her body trembling against his. And then the bond tore open between them. It was like nothing she had ever experienced. Everything Eric was poured into her, his loneliness and his hope, his grief and his joy, his fierce protectiveness and his tender love. She felt the darkness of his past, the massacre that had destroyed his pack, the years he had spent rebuilding from nothing. She felt his wonder when he first touched her, his terror when she walked into battle, his overwhelming relief when Kale fell beneath his jaws. She felt how much he loved her, how completely, how eternally. Eric withdrew his teeth, licking the wound gently to seal it. When he raised his head, his eyes were blazing gold, his expression raw and open. "Clara," he breathed, "my mate, my Luna, mine." But Clara wasn't finished. She pulled him down, rolled them until she was above him, until she could see the expanse of his chest, the powerful muscles of his shoulders, the place where his neck met his body. Her wolf, fully awake now, fully alive, howled inside her, demanding she complete what they had begun. "Mine," she whispered, and bit down. Eric's back arched off the bed. A guttural sound tore from his throat, half growl, half moan as her teeth pierced his flesh. Clara tasted copper on her tongue, felt the bond between them flare even brighter as it became truly mutual, truly complete. Through the connection, she felt everything he felt. The shock of pleasure, the overwhelming rightness, the sense of finally, finally, finally being whole. His hands gripped her hips hard enough to bruise, his whole body shaking beneath her. "Yours," he gasped. "I'm yours. Always. Forever. Mate." Clara released him, pressing a kiss to the mark she had made, her mark, claiming him as surely as he had claimed her. When she looked up, she found tears tracking down his face. "I never thought," his voice cracked. "I never thought I would have this. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, rebuilding something that would never be whole." And then you fell into my arms, and everything changed. Clara settled against his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her ear. The bond between them hummed with contentment, with love, with the absolute certainty that they belonged to each other. Her pup shifted sleepily inside her, and she felt Eric's hand come to rest over the movement. Our pup, he said softly. Our child. I don't care whose blood runs in their veins. I don't care about magic or power or prophecy. They are mine because you are mine, and I will love them with everything I have. Clara pressed her lips to his chest, right over his heart. I know you will. I've always known. They lay tangled together as the fire burned low, as the moon traced its path across the sky, as the sounds of the celebrating pack drifted up from the courtyard below. Shadowmere had survived, had triumphed, and in the morning there would be work to do, prisoners to deal with, alliances to forge, a pack to lead. But for now, there was only this. Two broken souls, finally healed. Two hearts, finally home. The formal ceremony took place 3 weeks later on the night of the full moon. Clara stood in the center of the great hall, draped in silver silk that Miriam had let out twice in the past week to accommodate her growing belly. She was nearing her 9th month now, and the pup made their presence known with increasingly assertive kicks. Her marking scar was visible at the collar of her dress. She had insisted on it, wanting everyone to see the claim Eric had placed on her, wanting there to be no doubt about her status. Eric stood beside her, resplendent in black, his own marking scar proudly displayed. He hadn't stopped touching her all evening, a hand at her back, fingers intertwined with hers, lips brushing her temple whenever he thought no one was looking. The entire pack had gathered to witness the ceremony. Clara saw Garrett at the front of the crowd, his arm around a pretty she-wolf who kept blushing whenever he looked at her. The warrior who had once called her a discarded breeder now stood straighter than anyone in the hall. She saw Miriam, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, surrounded by her healing apprentices. She saw young wolves and old wolves, warriors and workers, rogues and survivors, all of them looking at her with the same expression of hope and loyalty. Her pack, her family. Eric raised his voice, letting it ring through the hall. Tonight, we gather to honor our Luna. 3 weeks ago, this woman walked into battle to save us. She used power that by all rights should have killed her, and she did it without hesitation, without thought for herself. Because we needed her. His voice cracked slightly. Because she had already decided that we were hers, and she would not let us fall. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Clara Nightshade. Eric continued, turning to face her. You came to us as tribute. You became our healer, our Luna, our heart. Tonight, I ask you to accept the formal recognition of this pack, to take your place at my side as my equal, my partner, and my mate. Clara's voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I accept. With all my heart, I accept. Eric lifted a circlet of silver and moonstones, simple, elegant, beautiful, and placed it gently on her head. Then rise, Luna Clara of Shadowmere, and take your rightful place. The hall erupted in cheers. Wolves howled their approval, stamped their feet, called her name. Clara stood amid the celebration, one hand on her belly, the other clasped tightly in Eric's, and felt joy so bright it almost hurt. Later, when the feast was winding down and the younger wolves had begun to drift toward the moonlit woods for the traditional hunt, Clara slipped away to the terrace. She needed air. She needed a moment to process everything that had happened. The view from the terrace was stunning. Rolling hills bathed in silver moonlight, the dark edge of the forest, the glittering stars scattered across the sky. Clara leaned against the railing and breathed deeply, letting the peace of the night settle into her bones. She felt Eric approach through the bond before she heard his footsteps. He came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her, resting his chin on the top of her head. "You're supposed to be in there accepting congratulations," she murmured. "I'd rather be here with you." His hands spread across her belly, and she felt him smile against her hair when the pup kicked. "Are you happy, my Luna?" Clara turned in his arms, looking up at the face she had come to love more than anything in the world. "I never knew I could be this happy," she admitted. "When I came here, I thought my life was over. I thought I would never feel safe again, never feel wanted, never feel like I belonged anywhere. And now? Now I have a home, a mate who loves me, a pack that would fight for me." She pressed her hand over his heart, feeling it beat strong and steady beneath her palm. "Now I have everything I never dared to dream of." Eric kissed her forehead, her eyelids, the tip of her nose, and finally her lips. "You have more than that." "Dia," he said when they parted. "You have my soul, my heart, my eternal devotion, and you have—" He knelt suddenly, pressing his lips to her belly. "You have a pup who will never doubt they are loved, who will grow up in a pack that will protect them, cherish them, teach them that their worth is not in their power, but in who they are." Clara's hand found his hair, threading through the dark strands. "I love you, Eric Nightshade. I love you, Clara Nightshade." He rose, pulling her back into his arms. "Luna of Shadowmere, mother of my child, mate of my heart." Below them, in the courtyard, young wolves were gathering for the hunt. Clara watched them form their groups, watched Eric's beta, Garrett, lead the first howl to the moon. The sound rose into the night, wild and free and full of joy. Clara tilted her head back and added her voice to theirs. She was Luna, she was loved, she was home. And as Eric's howl joined hers, rising together toward the stars, Clara knew that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together. Two broken souls, rebuilt from ruins. Two hearts, bound by fate and choice and love, forever.